Hi, my name is David Blakesley, and this is Criterion Reflections, the latest version of a long-standing project I started in 2009 when I set out to fulfill my ambition of watching every film in the Criterion Collection in the chronological order of its original theatrical release. This started as a blog, it then turned into a podcast. Now it's going to be a series of short-term video clips hosted on YouTube and posted elsewhere, in which I kind of give an overview of the film, a look at the packaging if it's available, because I'm also going to be including streaming films from the Criterion channel, laser discs that I may not own, but I'll watch the film anyway, and really anything associated with the Criterion Collection is up for review here on this series. So I'll be talking about the films of 1973, so without any further ado, let's get into it. All right, let's get started with episode 1 of season 5 of Criterion Reflections. Here is my new phase, these YouTube clips that I plan to create about the different films I'll be watching as I cover Criterion Collection affiliated films from 1973. The first one I'm going to cover is The Age of the Medici. This is a part of the Eclipse series. 3 films in this set of Rossellini's history films, Renaissance and Enlightenment. This was released back in 2008 as part of that Eclipse series that is no longer issuing new titles, but was kind of a thriving subset of Criterion films back in the 2000s into the late 2010s. The Age of the Medici, this was a Eclipse series 14, and The Age of the Medici is the first one listed in that set. It's the most sort of substantial as far as length is concerned. This is actually a 4.5-hour TV miniseries that was originally broadcast at the end of 1972 and the beginning of 1973 on Italian television. Each episode is roughly around 80 minutes long, so it's not fully 4.5 hours, but maybe with advertising and whatnot, it would have made that long of a kind of an overall show. So what are we talking about here with these films, which are also available on the Criterion channel? I'll have more to say about that in a little bit, but you're not solely stuck with the Eclipse series if you want to watch these films for yourself. The Age of the Medici is kind of an analysis of the evolution of Florence, Italy in the 1400s. Cosimo de' Medici was the head of a very influential family. He really was kind of the sort of the precursor to today's ultra rich. He was a merchant who built a substantial fortune. Of course, he had an inheritance, but he was very canny and was able to kind of multiply the value of what he inherited just through shrewd trade and commerce, and became a very powerful citizen outside of the traditional paths of power, which at that time were either through ascending to the hierarchy of the church or perhaps being born into aristocratic nobility as part of the ruling class by bloodline, or perhaps by military conquest. Those were maybe the 3 ways that somebody could ascend to heights of power and prestige. The Medicis did it through just money. They basically accumulated vast wealth, and that was kind of the beginning of what you might consider modern times capitalism. But the Age of the Medici included a lot more than just financial prowess. The arts and ideas and technology were all very much a part of what made the Medicis and the city of Florence stand out as a high point of civilization at that time, at least in Europe. And so this film, these 3 parts, really kind of take us through the life of the Medici family and also other key figures of that time, and really is a very, very engrossing representation of life in that era, as far as the costumes, the set designs, even the dialogue. But I will say this is a very dry, almost, well, not ascetic, because it is lush visually. The visuals are pretty impressive in terms of recreating the ambiance of that era, but the performances are very subdued. This is a film that has intellectual pretensions to it, and I say that not as a criticism, or it's really just a description of what it's about. Rossellini, at this point in his career, and really for the 1960s on to the end of his life, had basically turned his back on commercially popular cinema, or in terms of trying to produce entertainment or box office hits. Like I said, these were films made for television because he had the concept that TV could be a means of educating the masses, bringing them into contact with the important ideas that shaped the world that they lived in at the time. And I feel like, that's a pretty noble pursuit, even though I have to acknowledge that none of these films offer a lot in terms of entertainment value. And if you're looking for, kind of dramatic tension or memorable acting performances, the characters are very subdued in their line delivery. There's not a lot of kind of displays of emotion or the kind of tension that typically moves us when we're watching a great film. And these probably won't register as great films for many viewers. In fact, there will probably be a fair number of people who would try them out and say, I can't hang with this, it just doesn't engage me enough. Perfectly understandable reaction. But, I've watched these films, I've watched this particular set probably 4 times through, at least, maybe even 5 over the years. And they've become a sort of comfort film for me, just because I really enjoy that kind of low-key presentation of big ideas. And so The Age of the Medici is probably the best example of kind of the breadth of the canvas that Rossellini is painting on, if you will, as it encompasses history, architecture, art, ideas, religion, ethics, philosophy, technology. I mean, all of the things that were happening in society at that time, and really have been happening across all societies, across all times. But Florence in the 15th century was a particularly fertile field, and one that I feel like you can watch these films and see so many echoes of the world we live in today, or maybe not echoes, but kind of preceding factors and qualities about the ultra rich and their influence, the slippery ethics, the ability to use sophisticated arguments to kind of change the way things are done in order to justify and legitimize what might have been otherwise considered inappropriate uses of power, or evidence of corruption by the people who are most influential in society. And so, yeah, that's my thoughts on these films. If you want a much more detailed breakdown, I do actually have a text that I wrote back in 2011 that I've updated for this purpose. Go to CriterionCast.com and you'll see kind of a new update of an essay that I wrote as I was doing a column called The Journey Through the Eclipse series for Criterion Cast back in the early 20-teens. And basically I've taken the text, made a few small modifications, included some images from those films. And I also did this coverage as a podcast with my friend Trevor Barrett in our The Eclipse Viewer podcast years ago. And I'll include a link there if you want to hear me and Trevor talk about not only this film, but also the other 2 in the Rossellini history films on the Eclipse series. Now back to the Criterion channel, I mentioned that a while back. This particular film was actually filmed in English, and the hope that Rossellini had was that they could basically sell this to the American PBS equivalent, whatever that was called at the time, but it was basically an educational channel, maybe in England as well. However, that deal did not go through, and so the official version of this is in Italian, which makes sense. But the actors were actually speaking English as they were being filmed, and so later on they did redub this in English. So if you're an English-speaking viewer, which I assume most people watching this video would be, you've got to get this disc in order to hear the tracks in English, and I think that's the best way to watch these movies if indeed you are an English viewer. If you watch it in Italian, of course, you'll have to have the subtitles, and the subtitles are also helpful just because there's a lot of intellectual content here. There's a lot of ideas and thoughts, and as they say in my essay, it's probably worth pausing every so often just to think about what was just said, because there's a lot of richness and density to the content. But yeah, The Age of the Medici, if you watch it on the Criterion channel, all you're going to get is the Italian track with English subtitles. It's not a bad way to watch the movie. I have watched it that way before, but it's better to let the ideas sink in if you hear the characters speaking in English, in my opinion anyways. And the only way you can do that is by watching on these discs. As far as I know, I don't think there's another online place to watch these films other than the Criterion channel. So those are my thoughts about The Age of the Medici. I do recommend these. I hope that my comments here have enticed your curiosity if you haven't seen them before. And like I say, a lot more detailed information and analysis is available in the essay on CriterionCast.com. But in any case, those are a few of my thoughts. Thanks for checking out and listening in.